I'm Lisa Haisha. Welcome to the Legacy Series. Today I am at Sally Kirkland's home, and it's such an honor to interview her. We worked together back in the 90s on a small independent film, and she was extraordinary. And I learned a lot about her there, and I want to learn more about her here. And now she just finished a film that we're hoping she wins the Academy Award for, because she certainly deserves it. It's called Archaeology of a Woman. So we will discuss her journey through Hollywood, where she has known everyone. Her godmother was Shelley Winters, and she dated Bob Dylan. It goes on and on from there. And she's still working. She's giving back. She's really grounded in her spirituality. And we're going to learn what makes her tick and what she wants her legacy to be. So welcome, Sally.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. This is so wonderful to sit here with you and share you with my audience.
Well, it's a joy.
Yes. So I would love to know about your childhood, starting there, of what made you want to be an actress, how you got connected in the business, and
okay. Well, I had a very famous mother, Sally Kirkland Sr., we'll call her. And she had been fashion editor of Vogue, and then for 25 years she was fashion editor of Life, back when Life was the news, the 40s, 50s, 60s. And because she used the byline Sally Kirkland, I always had an inferiority complex that I was Sally Jr. And so I was very proud of her. She did things like bring Italian fashions to this country, and the no bra look, and the mini skirt, and hippie chic, and all the Italians and the French, Christian Dior, whatnot. She and Diana Vreeland and Eugenia Shepherd were the fashion group. So everybody that was a fashion star had been approved by these three ladies. So you can imagine my life as a child. I was being pranced down as a kid model, celebrity model, in the you know, what do you call it, the showrooms and the fashion shows, along with young Carolyn Lee and young Tuesday Weld and young, oh, there's a third that you would know. It'll come to me later. And then I would be in the fashion magazines posing, and my father came from mainline Philadelphia, and he wanted me to be a debutante, so I was a debutante. And at the same time, I was always a rebel, and partially because my mother was the first person to hire a black photographer for Life magazine, and Henry Luce said, no, 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 and she said, well, then I'll quit my job. And so she was a rebel in so many ways. And I got involved with acting so that I would have a distinct voice aside from hers. And so I went to the Valley Drama Camp at 10 and did Shakespeare, did some Midsummer Night's Dream. And then all through high school, I was the president of the drama club. And
is this in New York?
Well, I was initially at Nightingale Bamford, New York. Then I went to the master's school, Dobbs Ferry, New York. And I always went to all-girls schools, so I always played men because I'm 5'9". So that really helped my acting, playing men at a very young age, because it gave, I'd use such vocal power and such strength to pull on to convince you that I was a guy, you know. And so I didn't want to go to college. I always knew I wanted to go right off Broadway, and I did when I was 17 or 18, and put in 10 years on stage in New York. That was the 60s, so it was the sexual revolution in the arts. And so in 1968, I became the first nude actress in American history with Terrence McNally's play Sweet Eros. Before Hair, before O Calcutta, was a member of the La Mama troupe with Tom O'Horgan, who went on to direct Hair, etc.
And your parents were okay with that?
Well, my father was not at all. My mother, being so hip, you know, she was okay. But the Kirkland family from Philadelphia, everyone was very, I don't think they talked to me for about a year. I was on the cover of Screw magazine writing a 500-pound sow nude, which was in the movie Futz. And Tom O'Horgan just took a still out of the film, and the next thing you know, I'm on the cover of Screw magazine. So being a 60s rebel was definitely part of it all. In the La Mama troupe, we were constantly being told in the New York Times that we should be put in jail, you know. And there would be police lined up at the back of the theaters because we were doing things that you just didn't do. In one play, Changes by Megan Terry, I was running for president against Frederick Forrest, who was running for president, and I had on a dress, and that covered up, forgive my cell phone in the background, that covered up a bodysuit with a penis and hair on my chest, and then I would be unzipped out of that, and I would be my nude self. Frederick Forrest, the same thing in reverse. So Walter Kerr had a field day with that, you know, and said these people should be in prison, what are they doing? And it was the sexual revolution in the arts, you know, way ahead of its time. So I like to think I was doing what Madonna eventually did,
right,
way back in the 60s. And I got quite a lot of notoriety in the 60s. I couldn't get in any taxi cab without the cab driver knowing who I was. There was so much publicity around my nudity.
How old were you when you did that? Your first nude?
68.
Like early 20s or?
No, more like 27 or so.
Late 20s.
I'm not very good at math, but I remember it was 1968. And Jimmy Rado and Jerry Ragney asked me to be in Hair, but Tom O'Horgan wouldn't let me out of the La Mama troupe, where I was starring in Tom Paine, about the revolutionary, and Futz, like I told you about. And so then when I saw what Hair was going to become, the first time Terrence McNally called me and said, I wrote this for you, and will you do it? And you'll be nude for 45 minutes. And I said yes, because I wanted to beat Tom O'Horgan at his own game, you know. And there I was. I had already done nudity with the La Mama troupe in Tom Paine with a gossamer veil in front of me. And very famous critic Clive Barnes said in the papers, he said, you know, that the nudity was done with such grace and such beauty, and that was the very first time anyone in the papers talked about it, you know, legitimately. Because in our minds, we were doing a revolution. You know, we couldn't stand the war in Vietnam. The New York Times called me up. I was the first nude picture on the cover of Arts and Leisure. And I was sitting in a chair like this, but it was my back and the side. You could see part of my breast and my arm. And that was the very first nudity ever in the New York Times. And they called me and they said, why are you doing this? You know, you're famous for doing Shakespeare with Joe Papp and this and that. And I said, well, I'm opposed to the Vietnam War, and you can't carry a gun on a naked body. And I'm also a painter, and I paint women. And I think women should be proud of their bodies no matter what. They shouldn't have to worry about what Playboy's doing, you know. So I was quite the mover and shaker.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And since then, I'm looking behind you. This is in your art studio / home.
Yeah.
And these are extraordinary paintings, and you did all of these.
Yeah.
Yes. So how long have you been painting?
Since I was 10.
Since you were 10.
I drew when I was 10, and I got into the paints in school, and I became an art major. Well, I didn't go to college, but I went to Harvard summer school and was an art major doing Caravaggio. And then the very year I got out of prep school, I joined a gallery called the Hinckley Broll Gallery and did group shows with other Greenwich Village painters and artists. And then I sold my paintings on the street, on 8th Street and 5th Avenue. I had one of those things.
And this is late 20s also?
No, early 20s.
Early 20s, okay.
No, maybe I was 18.
Oh, wow.
18, 19.
Okay.
I was a waitress at the Figaro on Bleecker, and then I would be on 8th Street selling my paintings. And then I would be going to Uta Hagen or Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. And then I checked in at the Art Students League and the School of Visual Arts and the National Academy of Design to please my grandparents and my father, who couldn't stand the idea of my being an actress, you know.
So did your mom push you into acting at all?
No, not at all.
So she didn't?
She never pushed me into anything except being a model for her various causes.
Did you have any interest in getting into fashion? Being a model
initially
or designing clothes?
Yeah, initially I drew drawings of clothes, and one time she got them to Christian Dior, and he wrote me a letter and said, Sally Jr., don't ever give up your ability to draw and paint and whatnot. So I thought I was going to be a designer. But then I realized she was Sally Kirkland, and
you wanted your own thing.
I wanted to do my own thing. Plus, my father was very funny, and he drank too much, and that would bring out a whole stand-up comedian side of him. And so I realized at a young age I had inherited some of his storytelling and some of his humor. And I was painfully shy, so when my mother would bring me out to her fancy parties in the living room in New York, the only way I could get through that experience was to tell a story of what had happened in school that day and try and make people smile and laugh. And so the storytelling started at, what, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you know, horrified at being an only child and meeting all these people. My mother would be hanging out with Grace Kelly and going to Monaco all the time, and Jackie O and Audrey Hepburn and you name it, and they would be on the covers of Vogue and Life. And it was all so glamorous, and it was like, and if she criticized me, she couldn't stand the way I dressed, you know, and she'd say, "You're not leaving the house like that." And I said, "Well, yes, I was." And of course, she was my height and had a model's body, and I've always been a little heavier than that, and so I had this incredible inferiority complex that I was not as beautiful as Verushka and Jean Shrimpton and these people that would be in the kitchen when I came for breakfast every morning, you know. So.
What an extraordinary childhood, though.
Yeah.
To meet all these amazing women.
People. Yeah.
Yeah, especially women role models.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
There was a lot of power in that. It was very empowering meeting all these fabulously looking and so bright women.
Did you have conversations with them? Or
Yeah.
What was a takeaway from like Grace Kelly?
Well, Grace Kelly I didn't meet because that would have involved me going to Monaco, which I didn't do. But Audrey Hepburn I met, and she was incredibly real and down to earth and very sweet to me. Jackie O, I did a play with Sam Waterston called Fitz and Biscuit at the Circle in the Square, and I was playing her, and he was playing Jack Kennedy on their sailboat, Fitz, or the Fitz or something. And we tried it out at the Actors Studio, and she was very close friends with the playwright, Max Furlow. So she came to the Actors Studio to see it. And she was very touched. She cried with me backstage. Mm. It was about her having a nervous breakdown because she didn't want to share her husband with the world. She wanted a normal family life.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Did you, well, what celebrity at that time influenced you the most that you met?
Shelley Winters, I met, you know, we call her my godmother, but in actuality I was 18 when I met her. And she took me in because she realized that my mother was around the clock busy, and so she became my mother, and that involved me living with her in New York and out here in LA.
How did you meet her?
There was an audition at the Actors Studio that I auditioned for called Days of the Dancing, and she was the star, and a guy named Timmy Everett was directing. And I auditioned to play a dancer who was on an LSD trip. And so that was easy. I had done LSD, I had danced. And she thought I was so remarkable doing what we call private moments in the Actors Studio. And since you said you liked Anna, there were a lot of, remember Me with the Cockroach?
Yes.
A lot of moments in Anna where there's nobody else but me and whatever's going on with my brain. And so Shelley told Lee Strasberg, "You have to get this girl in the Actors Studio. She's phenomenal. No one's looking at me on stage." So I auditioned like everybody else, but Lee did take me in at the age of 17 or something. I became the youngest member there. It was at a time when Geraldine Page and Rip Torn and Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward and in my class Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman. And then I brought Bobby De Niro to the Actors Studio, and he became a member. And I introduced Bobby to Shelley, now that I remember, and she introduced Bobby and me to Roger Corman, and Roger put him in his first movie, Bloody Mama. First Hollywood movie. I was supposed to be in it too.
Roger made so many stars to launch their
And
careers.
Roger kind of mentored me. He taught me how to produce, he taught me how to direct, he had me cast his movies and Julie Corman's movies. So because of Shelley, I became best friends with Roger, you know, and that's been decades and decades and decades, you know.
Is he still around today?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, now he's doing production for television. Yeah. Made over 500 films.
So what did that feel like at such a young age, and Shelley Winters was such a big star?
Well, again, I learned so much, you know.
And for her to take you under, what did you learn from her? What pearls of wisdom did she share? You actually introduced me to her. We went to her home together, yes.
Really?
Yes, and she told me, "What are you wearing high heels for? Take off those shoes."
I told you the same thing here.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, but she just thought high heels were bad for the back, and whoever created those, get rid of them.
She had her Oscar, you remember, on the mantelpiece, and she had a bust of Marlon Brando or something. Well, that's how I met her. Shelley taught me that you have to know what's going on in the world. it can't be about acting. You can't just be self-involved. You have to read the papers every day, which I do.
That's what Stella Adler also said.
Yeah. You have to really understand on an international level of what humanity's going through. And you have, when you can, you have to do plays and films and television that has some kind of social meaning. Like this movie I'm doing now, Archaeology of a Woman. The woman has Alzheimer's and dementia. And she's dealing with a tremendous amount of guilt from a crime she was involved with 30 years before. And everything that can unravels in her life, and including her relationship with her daughter, which is real hate-love. And so she ends up dealing with the Alzheimer's very much alone without family help, really. And many people have come up to me at the film festivals and whatnot and said, oh my God, that was my mother, that was my grandmother, that was my grandfather. And they cry. And
yeah, what a perfect role for you.
Yeah.
After seeing Anna, you have the capability of going so deep and so raw, I think more than any actress that I've ever witnessed.
Oh, Lisa, thank you.
I mean, it's extraordinary. And I'm looking at some of the reviews here. A riveting emotional tour de force with a brave, unforgettable performance by Sally. And stuff like that is so true with your work, because I know you do the method. Do you still use the method?
Well, method means truth. You know,
yes.
If you're not using your actual heart and soul and your own emotional experience or your imagination out of your own personal truth, then you're indicating. And when an actor indicates, you can tell. You know, you're watching them and you're watching them, but you don't get moved.
You don't get moved.
Right.
But several actors I talked to today that are up and coming or had 1 or 2 hits or television stars, they say they don't do that. They just work with what's in the moment. And I think there is still something to the method, because what you're saying, it's really taking you to the raw truth of what you experienced, and you have not everyone can do it, and I think that's why a lot of actors today don't, because it does take a lot of practice, a lot of work, and it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
You really are the part.
Yeah.
You're not, you know, playing
There's
a role.
2 books, if there's any young actors out there. Stanislavski wrote An Actor Prepares and Building a Character.
Yes.
So if you read those 2 books, that's it in a nutshell for method acting, which Stanislavski actually created, and Lee Strasberg and Elia Kazan and Stella Adler and all these people took from the group theater in Moscow. Yes,
and what would you say the difference is between Stella Adler and Strasberg?
Stella Adler was really into the script analysis and breaking down the script and all of that, and I think Lee was really into emotional recall. Not that Stella wasn't also, but I didn't study with her, I studied with Lee. And I learned personalization. Whoever I'm talking to or talking about, in my mind, I know who I'm really talking to and who I'm really talking about. Emotional recall, taking anything and everything that's ever happened to me in my life, as if I was capable of killing somebody.
So what is your process for that? Like with this Alzheimer's film, what internal work did you do? How long did it take for you to prep that?
It was pretty much at my fingertips. When I'm not acting, I'm Reverend Sally Kirkland in the Church of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness, and in that capacity, in the 90s, I trained to be a caretaker, and some young man named Rick Sherrill had AIDS, and he had no place to live, and his family rejected him, and I had him live here, and the last 6 months of his life, he was in full-out dementia, and so I dealt with that 24/7 and got him to the doctors and eventually to hospice, and was his power of attorney when I knew the moment had come for him to pass over. And that was a huge learning experience. My spiritual teacher, John Roger, who just passed over last month, told me to write a book on it, and I'm sorry I haven't yet, but I will, because being a caretaker is such an honor, you know, to be with someone who is either terminal or, you know, at a point where they just can't do anything for themselves. And it really opens your heart and, you know, connects you to spirit and God and all, I think. So when it came to this role, I just remembered Rick, and I had also been a caretaker for cancer patients, AIDS patients, and dementia patients. So quite a few of them, because of something called Heartfelt Foundation, which the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness has, and in that capacity we go out, we go to people's homes, at-risk kids. Whenever people need help, we're there, you know.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's a huge part of your life also.
Yeah, ever
so
since 75.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So for this role, you had all of that you brought to the part. How are you at memorizing?
Well, I hired somebody to spend 3 weeks with me, I think, and we just drilled every day for 3 weeks. There's a lot of, in Archaeology of a Woman, there's a lot of verbiage and a lot of nonsensical verbiage given her condition. And it was hard to memorize the nonsensical verbiage and get it all right, because that's an important part of the story.
Absolutely.
And
I know it's so hard for even 20-year-olds to memorize a script that is really based on your character.
Yeah.
So you have so much dialogue.
yeah.
So you really worked hard on that, because once you get that and you own that, then you have this background.
Yeah.
You're really able to put those together and focus just on being.
Yeah. Well, my emotions are really close to my surface, under the skin, so I don't have to work very hard for emotions. Rage and tears come fairly easy to me.
Yes.
But I'm lucky because I've never had to do anything else but either act or teach acting. I've taught for 35 years. I taught Sandra Bullock when she was 22, 23. I coached Liza Minnelli and Barbra Streisand, and Roseanne wanted to learn how to cry on cue for a television movie we were both doing. And Billy Paxton, I was his first acting teacher, and Kathy Green, I was her first acting teacher at the
Where did you teach?
I taught at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute for about 15 years, and then in different places in LA and New York. Now I coach one-on-one here.
Oh, okay, because I studied there in the early 80s.
Yeah, I would have been there.
Mark
Marno.
Marno
Yeah.
and
Hetty
Joanne.
Sontag.
Yeah, Hetty Sontag.
Joanna Baron passed over. She was wonderful.
Oh, did she?
Yeah.
Okay, those were my two teachers.
She and I did a movie directed by Neil Young called Human Highway, which is supposed to come out again. Joanna. Yeah, it's a neat family having the Actors Studio and the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute.
Yeah, so what do you think it takes to, since you're so gifted, you're beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, and why aren't you getting more roles like Meryl Streep?
Well, that's a good question. I honestly think the answer is that I made my priority my ministry and my spiritual path. And so if you talked about where I was putting my energy at any given time, I might be being a caretaker instead of being an actor. Or I might be at this seminar or that seminar, or learning about getting off the planet this lifetime, completing my karma this lifetime. You know, going home to God and not having to come back because I didn't get it right this lifetime.
Right.
You know.
Okay, so that was your priority. That took
It's my
up most of your
priority. I
time.
think if it was all about acting, well, I was pronounced dead from drugs in '66, and I had a life after life experience, and basically I was visited big time by Christ, and it was sort of like, you can stay here or you can go back and tell your friends about the other side. And so it was such a profound experience that when I came back into my body, I was a different person. And before, it was just all about acting. Sally, 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 Sally. And when I came back, I wanted to be a nurse, you know. I had
this is
so
in the late
dramatically
60s?
changed. 66, yeah. And I wasn't a nurse, but that was the first thing on my mind was, well, I don't want to act anymore. It's too ego-oriented, and it's too, there's so much competition, and it's so self-involving. And unlike many of the really successful actresses in my generation, I haven't, for the most part, been married. I've been married twice briefly, but for the most part, I've been alone in my life. And if you notice the women who really work all the time, they're all married. And the Boys Club still runs this business. You know, so no matter how you look at it, they look at you strangely if you're not married. You know, if they think, well, you know, how come she doesn't fit in? And I remember Robert Redford was nice enough to get me the part in The Sting, playing his girlfriend, the burlesque dancer. And when he heard I was going to live in LA after doing The Sting out here, he said, Sally, no, they won't understand you here. You have to go back to the New York theater where they'll understand you. And I said, but my spiritual teacher's out here. And if I have to choose, I want to be near him. So 40 years I had with John Roger, and if I'm any good at all at this thing called love, he taught me, you know.
Yeah, extraordinary man.
Yeah.
I studied at the University of Santa Monica.
Yeah, which he
he's a part
founded,
of.
yeah.
Yes, yes, and yeah, he did so many positive things
Yeah.
in the world.
The Institute for Individual World Peace, Peace Theological Seminary, Heartfelt
Insights.
Foundation, Insight Seminars, Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness is extraordinary. And he took on the name John Roger. His name was Roger Hinkins when he had a death experience, a clinical death experience. And he came back with the consciousness of John the Beloved. And I've been to the Museum of, the Metropolitan Museum of Art and seen a painting of Christ and John the Beloved from the 15th century. And it was J.R., it was John Roger. The same curly reddish brown hair, the same cheeks and chin and mouth and eyes. And I wrote him a letter, I said, I mean, were you really there? And he said, yes. You know, so that you can believe that or not, but that's my belief.
Mm.
Yeah.
Why do you think you never married or had children?
Well, I did get married twice, once to Michael Jarrett, who was the musician, and when I wanted to get off drugs and become initiated and ordained by John Roger, he didn't, and so the two didn't match.
Oh, so very short-lived.
Yeah, very short-lived. And Mark Hebert, I married when I was going around the country teaching insight acting workshops, and I met him in Florida, and he couldn't stand the idea of living in LA or New York, which I had to be for my career and my teaching. I couldn't endlessly tour, or I didn't want to. And anyway, and then I fell in love with Bob Dylan when I was 18 or something. I met him when I was 21, and then it was sort of like I followed him. He moved to LA, I moved to LA. And I was just always in love with Bob Dylan. And so I met him in '75. And so I'd have to say that the most exciting relationship in my life, although I haven't seen him in a long time. But for a while we were very close in the '70s and the late '80s and the late '90s. And I can find myself, this is my ego, but I can find myself in certain songs. Mm. I remember, you know, going through endless conversations and experiences with him where he would, you know, use me as a muse, and I would use him as a muse. And if I was doing a play or a movie, I would put on my headphones and be listening to Bob's music, and then the tears would start coming or whatever, you know. So he impacted my life hugely.
So he was the love of your life, really, from your soul.
Yes,
connection. So you didn't feel a need to try to get married and do that because your heart was with him.
Right. And when I was dating someone, I was always comparing them, you know.
Yes, yes.
And my husbands would say it's like being in bed with Sally Kirkland and Bob Dylan, you know. Mm. So I don't know what that's all about. Well, John Roger told me I had many, many lifetimes with him. And I told Bob that, and he said, yeah, that figures, yeah, you know.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you're so open. Since you were a young girl, when did you lose your virginity? And weren't you with like almost every many extraordinary actors?
Yeah. Did you read that somewhere?
You told me that on the Wilbur Falls set.
I did?
Yeah.
You've got a good memory.
Yeah. Well, it just stuck with me because it's like, I feel when you have sex with someone, you're attached to them. It's like a cord that connects you to this, and you've been with so many geniuses.
A lot of them.
How did that, I mean, just talk about that a little bit, and how did that affect you, or how?
Well, you said it yourself. I felt like I took away a little bit of them, and it helped my craft and my technique. And Bob would tell me, you got to keep working no matter what, Sally, no matter what. And that really impacted me, because a lot of women, you know, that I know got married and lived the fancy life and all of that. And for me, it was just about the next acting job or the next teaching gig. I guess over the years I dated, and I'm going to use the word dated because then there's a umbrella for, you can interpret it how you want. When I was in my 20s, Bobby De Niro and briefly Maximilian Schell and Angelina's father, John Voight, and Dustin Hoffman, and well, Rip Torn was my first love, and I had a nervous breakdown because he told me he was legally separated, and he wasn't. He was with Geraldine Page, was giving birth to 2 twins, so huge nervous breakdown. But I was in love. Oh God, there are many. Chris Christopherson. I just got lucky, and I was a fox, you know. When I was younger, I was a fox. I would just look at somebody with my eyes, and I could like
yes, mesmerize them. And I had to meet Sally and be with you. Yeah.
But don't forget, Shelley Winters was my mentor, and she would tell me how she and Marilyn Monroe, when they were roommates, would make up their lists of all the men they wanted to date, and then they would come home and tell each other about whatever their latest escapade was, or they would take turns having the apartment to themselves.
Oh, okay. So that was a strong influence.
They lived around the
with you
corner
too.
from here on Crescent Heights and Norton, right around the corner from here. Yeah. Shelley gave me Marilyn's, quote, "fuck me" shoes, and they were open-toed, open-back sandal heels, and I wore them until they were practically powder, and then Shelley wanted them back to auction for the Actors Studio. So, but every time I wore them, I felt like I was God. You know, I had Marilyn Monroe.
Of course, of course. Yeah, and how does that affect you? I know Marilyn once said she sometimes goes out of her house as Marilyn Monroe and other times as Norma Jean.
Right.
Did you also do that?
I got to play her, actually, 3 times. I played her on stage in a play Susan Strasberg wrote, If She Had Lived to Be in Her 40s. I played her in another play that Renee Taylor and Joe Bologna wrote, Had She Lived to Be in Her 50s. And I did a movie called Norma Jean, Jack and Me, which later came out as The Island, Had She Lived into her middle 50s. And she was living on a desert island with Jack, and they had never really died. They had been whisked away by the CIA to this island, Caribbean island. And then this drug dealer gets washed ashore, and he's a young kid, and he doesn't believe they're who they say they are. And Marilyn asks him questions about John Jr. and Caroline and all this. And it's hard to find, like a lot of my movies are hard to find, but it's called The Island or Norma Jean, Jack and Me. And I really had a blast playing her, and I got to know her stand-in, and her hairdresser, and the head of the Marilyn Monroe fan club, and I got to really get in all of that. And it was great. And I think Entertainment Tonight came out on the set in Santa Barbara and took, made a film of me preparing to play Marilyn, and then singing Happy Birthday to Michael Murphy, who played John F. Kennedy. Yeah. I've done about 150 movies now, and I can't even remember a lot of them. But the ones that stand out in my mind for your audience are, of course, Anna, and Revenge with Kevin Costner and Anthony Quinn, and Best of the Best with Eric Roberts, and Cold Feet with Tom Waits and Keith Carradine and Jeff Bridges and Rip Torn, and the cameos in The Sting, The Way We Were, A Star Is Born, Private Benjamin. Somebody told me on a radio show yesterday, they reminded me I was in Blazing Saddles playing the cashier when Slim Pickens comes down.
No, you forgot that?
Yeah. I just hadn't thought of it recently. And I did it uncredited because I was like a snob. I had just done The Sting, The Way We Were, and had more lines than I did in Mel Brooks' film. And I said to Mel, you know, I'll do it, but I don't want my name. Stupid, you know. Anyway, I was the cashier when Slim Pickens comes down the food, what do you call it? On the tray, and I'm ringing him up, ending with, I remember my last 2 words were tuna surprise, and whenever I ran into Anne Bancroft and Mel Brooks, they would give me my dialogue, you know. Anyway, I loved doing The Haunted, A True Story, which I got a Golden Globe nomination for. That was on television, and I loved a film called Coffee Date, playing the mother of 2 guys who can't figure out if they're straight or gay. I just did a film that hasn't come out yet called Suburban Gothic with Matthew Gubler. I just did Criminal Minds in the past couple of years, and I play this diva whose son kills all these young 20-year-old girls who looked the way she looked when she was in her 20s, or tried to kill them. Matthew Gubler I got to know, and he's starring in Suburban Gothic and with Kat Dennings from Two Broke Girls, and John Waters is in it, and I play John Waters' assistant, and we have this organization that brings people back from the dead. So it's like a horror comedy flick.
Oh, interesting.
Suburban Gothic.
So what's a setback that you had in your life and then you overcame it and were able
Being pronounced dead from drugs, yeah.
Okay.
Luckily that had an impact on me, so I don't do drugs and I don't smoke and I don't drink, and I'm pretty boring.
So you overcame it by changing your way of lifestyle.
I got into yoga.
Lifestyle.
I became a yoga teacher for 35 years. And of course I met Swami Satchidananda, who made me a yoga teacher, and then I met John Roger in '73. So since '73, I've been on this path that I'm on now. You can find, if you go to msia.org, it's right there, everything. You know, you can look at Moments of Peace right there.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I have to go meet with or fortunately for me, with a member of the Hollywood Foreign Press.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, it's a word I mentioned earlier, truth. That my life is about truth and living love, not talking about it, but living it. You know.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank
this
you,
was
Lisa.
so wonderful
Oh.
sitting with you and learning more about you and
Thank
hearing
you.
it from you again.
Thank you very much.
It's been too long. And just for the audience, are you still coaching,
Yeah.
acting? And okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. And you could go to your website at
SallyKirkland.com.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Uh-huh.